He walked into the small town hall with the kind of confidence that turned heads. His coat was neat, his shoes polished, and in his eyes there was that quiet certainty of someone who believed he was already the winner. For him, this music competition wasn't really a challenge. It was just another chance to show everyone how good he was. He had been playing the piano since childhood, trained by the best teachers, and he had won several local awards before. So when he heard about this contest in a nearby town, he didn't think twice before signing up. As he looked around, he couldn't help but smile. The hall was old but charming, filled with wooden chairs and a slightly out-of-tune piano sitting on a small stage. The air smelled faintly of polish and dust, and sunlight slipped through the high windows in golden stripes. A few other contestants were already there, nervously holding their music sheets or whispering to friends. But he didn't feel nervous at all. To him, this was going to be an easy win. He noticed that most of the contestants looked young, students, hobbyists, or people who probably learned music in community classes. He walked past them with a polite nod, but in his mind he had already ranked himself above them. He believed skill was everything. He could play difficult pieces that others wouldn't even attempt. He thought, how can anyone here possibly match me? As he signed the registration sheet, he glanced at the list of names. His eyes stopped at one, E. Turner. Next to it, under the experience column, it said, self-taught. He chuckled softly to himself. A self-taught player in a piano competition? That sounded like a waste of time. Maybe she played a few songs at family gatherings. Maybe she knew how to play Happy Birthday. He imagined it would be awkward when she tried to compete with people who actually trained. He leaned back on one of the chairs and scrolled through his phone while waiting for his turn. The judges sat at a table near the stage. 3 of them, all local teachers, and one elderly gentleman who seemed to be the head judge. The audience was small, just some families, neighbors, and friends. It wasn't a big event, but he liked performing even for a small crowd. He liked the sound of applause. When his name was finally called, he straightened his jacket, cracked his knuckles lightly, and walked up to the piano. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. The hall fell silent. He sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. His fingers moved fast and confident over the keys. The melody was sharp, clean, and filled with energy. Every note was in the right place. People nodded, impressed by his skill. Even the judges exchanged small glances, clearly acknowledging his talent. He played through a difficult classical piece without a single mistake. It was powerful, technical, and precise, exactly what he wanted it to be. When the last note faded, the audience clapped. He smiled, gave a small bow, and walked off the stage feeling satisfied. That should do it, he thought. He sat down again, still smiling. He was already imagining the moment when his name would be called as the winner. As the next few contestants performed, he barely paid attention. Most were fine, but none reached his level. He checked his phone again, scrolling absent-mindedly. That's when the announcer called the next performer. Next, please welcome Evelyn Turner. He looked up casually, curious to see the self-taught woman. When she walked to the stage, he almost felt sorry for her. She looked simple, maybe in her mid-50s, wearing a faded floral dress and a plain cardigan. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she carried no music sheets, no fancy folders, just a quiet smile. She looked like someone who had spent her life doing ordinary things, cooking, cleaning, teaching maybe. Not someone who belonged on a stage. She approached the piano slowly, her steps soft and careful, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. She touched the side of the instrument gently before sitting down, like greeting an old friend. The hall grew quiet again, though this time not out of excitement but out of mild curiosity. No one expected much. He leaned back, arms crossed, thinking this would be over soon. Probably a simple song, he told himself. Something sweet and short, but something in the air shifted the moment she placed her hands on the keys. She didn't start right away. She just sat there for a few seconds, breathing slowly, her fingers resting gently on the keyboard. It felt almost like she was listening, to the silence, to her memories, to something deeper than sound. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but warm. The melody flowed like a quiet river, smooth and tender. It wasn't a famous piece, not something from the books he knew. It was simple, but there was something in it that pulled people in. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. The sound filled the hall not with loudness or speed, but with feeling. Each note seemed to carry a story, something personal, something real. He frowned a little, confused. She wasn't fast. Her technique wasn't perfect. But still, her music had something his didn't. There was a weight behind every key she touched. Her eyes were closed, her face calm, as if she was remembering someone or something she had lost long ago. For the first time that day, he stopped thinking about winning. He just listened. The melody rose gently, then fell again like a heartbeat. It had sadness in it, but also peace. A few people in the audience had tears in their eyes, though they couldn't explain why. The elderly judge nodded slowly, tapping his pen against his notebook. Even the children in the back sat still, quiet. When the final note came, she didn't lift her hands right away. She let the sound fade naturally, almost like a goodbye. Then she opened her eyes and smiled softly, as if she'd shared something private and was grateful to have done so. The hall stayed silent for a few seconds before applause began. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew, steady, heartfelt. People stood up, clapping longer than they had for anyone else. The simple woman stood, gave a small bow, and walked off the stage with grace. She didn't look proud or surprised. She just looked content. He sat there, still staring at the piano. Something inside him felt strange. He had played perfectly, but her imperfect song had touched something deeper. He didn't even know what to call it. It was as if she had reached a place in people's hearts that he couldn't reach, no matter how skilled he was. He realized that maybe he had been wrong. Maybe music wasn't just about being perfect. Maybe it was about something else, something he had forgotten along the way. The competition continued, but in his mind, the real performance had already happened. He didn't know who would win yet, but he knew one thing. That simple woman, the one he had dismissed without a thought, had changed the entire feeling of the room the moment she touched those keys. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the best player in the hall. He just felt small and oddly peaceful. Because deep down, he knew he had witnessed something rare, something real. He sat quietly, listening to the next contestant, but his thoughts kept going back to her music. It wasn't just the sound he remembered. It was the emotion, the story behind it, the truth of it. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment was the start of a change he would carry for the rest of his life. The sound of her music still echoed in his mind long after she left the stage. He tried to shake it off, but it lingered. It wasn't just a melody anymore. It was like a memory that refused to fade. While the next performer prepared, he glanced around and noticed something different in the air. People were still whispering about her, their eyes a little softer, their smiles a little warmer. He had never seen an audience react like that before. Usually people clapped politely and moved on, but now there was something deeper in their faces. It was as if that simple tune had touched a place no one had expected. He crossed his arms and leaned back, pretending he didn't care. But inside, a quiet question had started growing. Who was that woman? When the event ended for the day, everyone began to leave the hall. The contestants chatted outside, laughing and comparing their performances. He stepped out too, the cool evening air brushing his face. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky with soft orange light. He noticed her standing alone near the gate, holding a small bag and smiling at someone who had stopped to thank her for her performance. She didn't look like someone who had just surprised an entire hall of people. She looked ordinary, peaceful. He hesitated, thinking about walking over, but something stopped him. Maybe pride, maybe confusion. Instead, he turned and walked the other way. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the soft notes of her music again and again in his head. He even tried to play something on his own piano to distract himself. But no matter how many complex pieces he played, they felt empty. The sound was perfect, but it had no soul. He realized with a strange feeling that her simple melody had more life in it than all his practiced perfection. The next morning, he returned to the hall for the second round of the competition. The atmosphere was lighter now. People smiled more, talked more. Everyone had been touched by what had happened the previous day. Even the judges seemed more thoughtful. She was already there, sitting in the corner with a cup of tea in her hands. She wore the same calm smile as if nothing special had happened. Some of the younger players came up to talk to her. He watched as she listened to them kindly, answering their questions with patience. She didn't seem to see herself as someone above them. There was no pride, no show-off attitude. She looked happy just being there. He stood nearby, pretending to read his music sheets, but he was listening. One of the young players asked her, "How long have you been playing?" She smiled gently and said, "Since I was 16, maybe a bit earlier. I started after my father passed away. He used to play this old piano at home. After he was gone, I just wanted to hear that sound again, so I taught myself." Another person asked, "Did you have any teacher?" She shook her head slowly. "No, just my ears and a lot of patience. I listened, I failed, and I tried again. Sometimes I didn't even know if I was getting better, but music was always a friend to me. It helped me through everything." Her voice was soft, but it carried warmth. The others listened quietly. There was something about the way she spoke, calm, honest, and full of life. He found himself drawn to her words. Later that day, he finally gathered enough courage to speak to her. She was sitting alone near the piano, wiping the keys gently with a piece of cloth before her next performance. He walked up slowly. "Your performance yesterday," he began, trying to sound casual. "It was different." She looked up and smiled. "Different good or different bad?" He hesitated, then said, "Good, very good, actually." "I wasn't expecting that," she laughed softly. "Neither was I just played what I felt." Her answer was simple, but it hit him hard. He had always played what he thought people wanted to hear, not what he felt. He asked, "How did you learn to play like that?" "I mean, without a teacher, without books?" She looked thoughtful. "I used to listen to the sounds of rain, the wind, even the creak of the old floorboards at night. Everything had rhythm. Everything had a kind of music in it. I guess I just tried to play the sound of life." He didn't know what to say. For someone who had trained for years under professionals, her words felt strange and yet so true. There was no arrogance in her tone, just honesty. When it was her turn again to play, the hall fell silent. He sat among the audience this time not as a competitor but as someone eager to learn. She played another simple tune, soft, emotional, almost like a story told without words. It was different from the first one, but it carried the same truth. She didn't just play notes, she played feelings. He watched closely, noticing how her fingers moved. They weren't always precise, but they were alive. Her timing was not perfect, yet every imperfection added something human to the song. He realized that her power came from connection, not from control. She wasn't fighting the music. She was flowing with it. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause again. This time he clapped too, genuinely. For once there was no jealousy in him, just respect. After the session, he walked out with her and they talked. She told him more about her life, how she had worked as a school teacher for years, how she played piano in the evenings to relax, how her late husband had built her first piano from scrap wood because they couldn't afford a real one. That piano, she said, had the softest sound she ever heard. She didn't talk about herself like someone special. Every story she told sounded simple, but behind every word was deep emotion. He listened quietly. The more she spoke, the more he realized how much he had been missing in his own music. He had spent years chasing perfection, but she had spent her life chasing meaning. At one point, she looked at him and said, "Music isn't about being better than someone else. It's about understanding what your heart wants to say. People don't remember perfect notes, they remember how a song made them feel." He nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, someone's words truly reached him. He felt humbled. That evening, when he returned to his small rented room, he sat down at the piano and stared at the keys for a long time. He didn't open any sheet music. He didn't want to play a famous piece or a competition song. He just wanted to try what she had said, to play what he felt. At first it was awkward. His fingers stumbled. He didn't know where to begin. But then he closed his eyes and let his mind drift to his memories. His childhood, his mother's laughter. The long nights of practice. The moments of loneliness between shows. Slowly his fingers began to move. The melody that came out was simple, quiet, almost uncertain, but it felt real. For the first time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being honest. And as the notes filled the room, he smiled faintly. Maybe this was what she meant. Maybe this was where true music began, not from talent, not from trophies, but from truth. When the next day of the competition arrived, he didn't walk in with the same proud step. Something in him had changed. He wasn't there to prove anything anymore. He was there to learn. He noticed the woman sitting in the same corner, calm and warm as ever, and when their eyes met, he gave a small nod. She smiled back as if she already knew what had shifted inside him. In that small hall, surrounded by ordinary people and old wooden chairs, he found something he hadn't found in years: peace. He still didn't know who would win, but deep down he had already discovered something far more valuable than a prize. He had found a reason to play again. The next morning the sky was covered with soft gray clouds. The air felt cool and fresh after a light rain during the night. He reached the town hall early, carrying his music sheets in one hand and a quiet determination in his heart. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about being the best. He was thinking about playing honestly like she did. Inside, the hall smelled of fresh coffee and polished wood. A few contestants were already there, tuning instruments or chatting nervously. He noticed her sitting near the piano again, her small bag beside her chair. She looked peaceful as always. There was something about her calmness that made the noisy room feel softer. He walked up and greeted her politely. "Good morning," he said. She smiled warmly. "Good morning. You're early," he nodded. "I couldn't sleep much," she chuckled softly. I know that feeling. Before my first performance years ago, I stayed up all night thinking I'd forget every note." He laughed lightly. "Did you?" "No," she said, smiling again. "But I learned something. Sometimes nerves aren't the enemy. They remind us that we care." Her words were simple, but they made sense. He realized how often he had played without caring, just performing for applause. But now he actually cared again. When it was time to perform, he took his place in the line of contestants. Everyone seemed more serious now. The judges had announced that today's round would decide who went to the final. The air was full of quiet tension. One by one, people went up to play. Some performed energetic tunes, others emotional ballads. Each tried to stand out. He listened carefully this time, not to compare but to understand. Everyone had something unique. Some had speed, others control, but only a few played with real emotion. When his name was called, he stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and walked to the piano. The stage lights felt a little warm on his face. For a moment, he thought about all the competitions he had done before, how mechanical they felt, how empty the victories were. But now, standing there, he felt different. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and paused. The hall was silent. Then he began to play. It wasn't one of his usual grand, showy pieces. It was something simpler. Something he had played the night before when he was alone. The melody started soft like a whisper. Slowly it grew deeper, carrying all the things he had never said out loud. The pride, the loneliness, the exhaustion, the hope. Each note felt like a confession. He didn't think about mistakes or speed or the judges. He just let his hands move where his heart wanted to go. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was speaking. And even though the music wasn't perfect, it felt real. When he finished, there was silence again, but a different kind this time. It wasn't confusion, it was stillness. The kind that comes when people are touched but can't find the right words. Then the applause began, soft at first, then stronger. He stood, bowed slightly, and walked off the stage quietly. He didn't smile. He just felt light, as if a heavy weight had lifted off his shoulders. As he returned to his seat, she looked at him and nodded gently, her eyes kind and knowing. "You played from the heart," she whispered. He nodded back, unable to speak. That simple sentence meant more to him than any compliment he had ever received. When it was her turn to play again, everyone watched closely. She didn't rush. She sat down slowly, touched the piano like it was an old friend, and began to play. This time her song was different. It was slower, deeper, almost like a prayer. The notes moved like quiet footsteps through memories. It felt like she was talking to someone who wasn't there anymore, someone she missed deeply. He could see the emotion in her face, the gentle sadness, the warmth, the peace. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was remembering, and that memory became music. When she finished, the hall stayed silent for a long time. Then people started clapping, some standing up again just like before. She smiled humbly, gave a small bow, and returned to her seat. He couldn't help but ask quietly, "That song, it sounded personal. Did you write it?" She nodded. "Yes, my husband built my first piano with his hands. It was old and rough, but it had the most beautiful sound. This was the last song I played on it before it broke." He felt his throat tighten, There was no way to respond to that. He just nodded slowly, understanding now why her music had so much heart. It came from love and loss. The day ended with mixed feelings among the contestants. Everyone knew the competition was no longer just about skill. The judges had seen something deeper, something that numbers or technique couldn't measure. That evening, the results for the final round were pinned on the board outside the hall. People gathered around, pushing gently to see the list. He took a deep breath before stepping closer. His name was there. But what caught his eye was the name below it. Hers. She had also made it to the final. He smiled. It felt right. That night, as he walked back to his small rented room, he thought about how much had changed in just a few days. He had entered the contest thinking it would be an easy win. Now winning didn't even seem that important anymore. Something else had taken its place: respect, understanding, maybe even friendship. He spent the night practicing, but not to impress the judges. He practiced to express himself. Every note he played carried emotion now. Sometimes he made mistakes, but he didn't stop. He was learning to play real music for the first time in his life. The next morning, the town buzzed with excitement. The final performance was going to be held that evening, and word had spread beyond the hall. People who hadn't attended the first rounds were planning to come. The small hall would be full. When he arrived, he found her sitting quietly again, holding a small thermos of tea. She smiled when she saw him.
"Big day," she said softly. He nodded.
"Yes, are you nervous?" She shook her head. "No, I'm grateful. Not everyone gets a chance to share their heart with people. That's already a gift," he smiled faintly. "You really love music, don't you?" She looked at the piano across the hall and said, "Music is life to me. When words fail, music speaks. It has been my friend through everything. Joy, pain, loneliness. That's why I play. To remember who I am." Her words stayed with him long after. When the final round began, the audience filled every seat. Some even stood near the walls. There was an excitement in the air, a mix of curiosity and admiration. Everyone knew that this wasn't just another small-town contest anymore. Something special was happening. The judges gave a short speech, then the first performer walked up. One by one, people gave their best. Every performance had emotion now. Maybe they, too, had been inspired by the simple woman's music. He was scheduled to perform before her. When his turn came, he walked onto the stage with a calm heart. He looked at the piano, smiled slightly, and sat down. The hall went quiet. He began to play a new piece he had composed himself, a gentle mix of his memories and feelings from the past few days. The melody was honest and peaceful, carrying everything he had learned from her. When the song ended, there was a deep silence before the applause. He looked at the judges, then at her sitting in the front row. She gave him that same warm, encouraging smile, and then it was her turn. She stood up slowly and walked to the piano. Her steps were unhurried, graceful. The hall became still again. She adjusted the chair, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The sound that came out was soft, like the whisper of an old memory. Her song carried the spirit of her life, the love she had lost, the beauty she had found in small things, the strength she carried quietly through the years. He listened, motionless as her music wrapped around everyone like a warm light. He knew deep in his heart that no one could play like that, not because of training or talent, but because no one else had lived her life. When the final note faded, the entire hall stood up. The applause was thunderous. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes. He clapped too, his heart full, not with jealousy but admiration. He knew this moment wasn't about competition anymore. It was about truth, and she had shared hers beautifully. As the sound of applause echoed through the hall, he realized something simple yet powerful. Music, at its heart, wasn't a race. It was a bridge between souls, and she had built that bridge perfectly, one gentle note at a time. The applause in the hall seemed to go on forever. People stood on their feet, clapping and cheering as the simple woman bowed her head humbly. She didn't look proud. She didn't look surprised. She just smiled softly, as if she had shared a secret with the world and was grateful that they had listened. He sat in his seat, watching her, his heart full of emotions he couldn't even name. The noise around him faded. All he could hear was the echo of her music in his mind. That melody had touched something deep inside him, something he didn't even know existed before. When she stepped down from the stage, a few people reached out to shake her hand. Others simply nodded, still too moved to speak. He noticed tears in the eyes of the elderly judge who had been quiet through most of the event. That told him everything. What she had played wasn't just music. It was truth. The host took the microphone and tried to speak, but even he struggled to find words. That was truly something special, he finally said, his voice trembling slightly. Let's take a short break before the results. People began talking softly, but no one really left their seats. It felt like everyone wanted to hold on to that feeling for a little longer. He stood up slowly and walked outside. The air felt cool, and a gentle breeze carried the faint sound of laughter and chatter from nearby stalls. The world seemed quieter, softer after that performance. He walked a few steps and then stopped near a small garden behind the hall. She was there, sitting on a bench under a tree, her bag beside her and a thermos of tea in her hand. She looked peaceful, her eyes half closed as if resting after a long day. He approached slowly. That was beautiful, he said quietly. She opened her eyes and smiled. Thank you. You played beautifully too. He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. For a while they didn't talk. The silence wasn't awkward, it was calm, like the space after a long song where both listeners and players take a breath. Finally, he asked, "How do you do it? How do you make people feel so much with just a few notes?" She looked at her hands and said softly, "I don't try to make people feel anything. I just remember. Every note is a memory. Some are happy, some are sad, but all of them are real. People can feel when something is real. That's what touches them." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand now. I used to think music was about skill, about being perfect. But you showed me it's more than that." She smiled faintly. "Perfection is empty without heart. You can have the fastest fingers, but if your heart is silent, the music has no soul. People don't need perfect, they need honest." Her words stayed with him like an echo. He looked at her, this quiet woman who had walked into his life and changed everything without even trying. There was something powerful about her simplicity. When the break ended, everyone gathered back inside. The hall was filled with nervous energy again. The judges took their seats, papers in hand, and the audience waited eagerly for the results. The head judge stood up holding the microphone. His voice was steady but full of emotion. "We've heard incredible talent over these past few days," he said. "Each of you brought something unique. But tonight, two performances stood out, not just for skill but for the way they spoke to the heart." Everyone leaned forward. The hall was silent again. "The runner-up," the judge continued, "is someone who showed great growth, humility, and a true understanding of what music means." He felt his heart pounding as the judge paused. "Please give a big hand to..." The judge said his name. The hall clapped warmly. He stood up slowly, bowing slightly. Strangely, he didn't feel disappointment. In fact, he felt peace. For once, he was happy not because of a title, but because he had finally learned what music really was. Then the judge smiled and said, "And the winner of this year's competition is..." The remarkable woman whose simple yet powerful performance touched every soul in this room. The applause that followed was thunderous. Everyone stood cheering and clapping. She looked shocked for a moment, then smiled humbly and walked toward the stage. She didn't cry, didn't act overwhelmed. She just accepted the small golden trophy with both hands, bowing deeply to the audience and judges. "Thank you," she said softly into the microphone. "Music has been my companion for many years. I never thought it would lead me here. I'm just grateful that my song found a home in your hearts." Her words brought another wave of applause. He clapped too, a genuine smile on his face. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't bitter. He felt proud. Proud to have shared the stage with her. Proud that he had learned something so important. After the event ended, people surrounded her, congratulating her and asking for photos. He stayed back for a while, just watching quietly. When the crowd thinned, she turned and saw him standing near the door. "You played wonderfully," she said, walking up to him. "You reminded me of why I love music." He looked surprised. "Me, I should be the one thanking you. You changed how I see everything." She chuckled softly. "Maybe that's how music works. It connects people who need to learn something from each other." He smiled. "Maybe so." They talked for a while longer, and before leaving, she handed him a folded piece of paper. "It's the melody I played," she said. "You might want to try it sometime." He unfolded it later that night, sitting by the window of his small room. The notes were handwritten, simple but elegant. There were no fancy markings, no complicated instructions, just pure music. He placed it on his piano and began to play. As his fingers followed the notes, he could feel her emotion in every chord. It was as if she had shared a piece of her soul with him. He played it again and again, each time understanding it a little better. It wasn't about showing skill, it was about feeling alive. Days passed and the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The competition ended, but its memory stayed alive in people's hearts. He stayed in town for a few more days, teaching a few classes and performing small concerts. Everywhere he went, people talked about her, about the woman who played like she was telling a story, about how she made everyone cry without saying a single word. He often found himself walking by the small park where they had talked. Sometimes he would sit on the same bench, close his eyes, and remember the sound of her song. It reminded him of how much he had changed in just a few days. Before leaving town, he visited her small home. It was a modest house with potted plants near the door and the faint sound of a piano coming from inside. She was teaching a group of children, their laughter filling the air. She looked up when she saw him and smiled warmly. "You're leaving?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I wanted to say goodbye and thank you." She nodded. "I'm glad you came here. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence. Sometimes life brings people together for a reason." He smiled. "I think you're right." They shook hands and he turned to leave. But before walking away, he stopped and said, "I'll keep playing the way you taught me, to feel, not to perform." Her eyes softened. "Good. That's the only way music stays alive." He nodded and left, carrying that sentence in his heart like a melody. As he boarded the train that evening, the town lights faded in the distance. He looked out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and gold. He thought about everything that had happened, the confidence, the pride, the lessons, and the peace he had finally found. He took out a small notebook and began writing. Not notes this time, but words. His thoughts, his memories, everything he had learned, he wrote. She played from the heart, and when she touched the keys, the world stopped to listen. He closed the notebook, smiled to himself, and whispered, "Sometimes, losing is the only way to truly win." The train kept moving, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt alive. Weeks passed after the competition, but the memories stayed fresh in his heart. The small town, the old piano, the soft lights, and that gentle woman who changed his life. All of it felt like a beautiful dream that he never wanted to end. Every time he sat down to play, her words came back to him. People don't need perfect, they need honest. He had returned to the city, to his usual busy life filled with concerts, rehearsals, and teaching sessions. But something inside him had changed completely. Earlier, he used to chase praise and applause. He used to measure his worth by the size of the crowd and the number of trophies on his shelf. Now, when he played, he looked for something else. Peace. One evening, he was preparing for a performance in a big concert hall. The room was large, the lights bright, the audience formal. It was the kind of place he once dreamed of performing in. But as he looked at the grand piano waiting on stage, he felt a strange emptiness. The excitement that usually came before a show wasn't there. Instead, he thought of that small town hall, the warmth of the audience, and the way her music had filled the air like a soft light. He sat backstage, lost in thought. One of his fellow musicians came over and said, "You look quiet today. Nervous?" He smiled faintly. "No, just thinking." When it was his turn, he walked onto the stage slowly. The audience clapped politely and he bowed. But instead of playing one of his usual complex classical pieces, he decided to do something different. He pulled out a small sheet of paper from his coat pocket, the same paper she had given him with her handwritten melody. He placed it on the stand, took a deep breath, and began to play her song. At first, some people in the audience looked confused. The tune was simple, too simple for such a grand event. But soon the room began to quiet down. The melody filled the space gently, softly, like a breeze passing through an open window. The sound wasn't powerful, but it had something rare, truth. As he played, memories came rushing back. Her kind eyes, her gentle smile, her calm voice saying, "Every note is a memory." He felt his own emotions blending with hers, and the music became a conversation between their souls. When the last note faded, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, loud, genuine, and full of feeling. But this time he didn't feel proud or superior. He just felt grateful. After the concert, several people came up to him and asked, "What piece was that?" "It was beautiful." "Who wrote it?" He smiled softly and said, "Someone who taught me what music really means." That night, when he returned home, he sat by the piano and looked at her sheet again. The edges were slightly worn now, but the handwriting was still clear. He thought about writing her a letter to tell her how much she had changed him, so he took out a pen and began to write. He started with, "Dear teacher," because that's what she had become to him, not through lessons or books, but through truth and kindness. He wrote about how her words had changed the way he saw music, how her melody had touched so many people even far from her small town. He ended the letter with, "Thank you for showing me that real music doesn't come from the hands, it comes from the heart." He sealed the envelope and mailed it the next morning. Days turned into weeks, and he waited eagerly for a reply. Every time the mail arrived, he hoped to see her handwriting, but nothing came. One day, he decided to visit her town again. He felt he needed to see her in person, to tell her how much she had inspired him. So he packed a small bag, took the same train, and headed back. The journey felt nostalgic. The passing fields, the quiet roads, the little houses along the way. It was all as he remembered. When he reached the town, he walked to the small house where she used to live. The flowers near the entrance were still there, blooming beautifully. But there was something different. The door was closed and the sound of the piano wasn't there anymore. An elderly neighbor was watering plants nearby. He approached politely and asked, "Excuse me, does the lady who lived here still stay?" The old woman looked up and sighed softly. "Oh, you must be talking about her. She passed away a few weeks ago." He froze. "Passed away?" he repeated softly, not believing what he just heard. The woman nodded. "Yes, she was very peaceful in her last days. She used to play piano every evening until she couldn't anymore. She often talked about a young musician who reminded her of her younger self. I think she meant you." He stood there quietly, unable to speak. His heart felt heavy, but at the same time there was a strange calmness inside him. It was as if she had already said goodbye through her music. The neighbor smiled kindly and said, "She left something with me, just in case you ever came back." She went inside and returned with a small wooden box. She said you would understand. He took the box gently in his hands. Inside was a small photo of her sitting by her piano, smiling, and a folded piece of paper. He opened it slowly. It was another handwritten note. It read, "If you are reading this, then life has taken me to another quiet place. Don't be sad. Keep playing, keep feeling. Don't let music become a race again. Remember, every note you play carries a part of your heart. Play it with love and you'll never be forgotten." He sat on the small bench near her house, holding the letter tightly. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were of gratitude. He looked at the piano room through the window, imagining her sitting there, her gentle hands touching the keys one last time. He stayed in that town for a few more days. Each evening, he went to the same small park where they had once sat together. He would take out his small keyboard and play her melody for anyone who wanted to listen. Children would gather around, old people would smile, and sometimes strangers would stop just to close their eyes and enjoy the music. And every time he played, he felt like she was there too, somewhere in the sound, smiling quietly. Months later, he started a small project in her memory. He began visiting schools and community centers, teaching young children how to play the piano. Not the way he had once learned with strict rules and perfection, but with feeling. He told them, "Play like you're telling your own story. Play like you're talking to someone you love." The children loved it. They laughed, they made mistakes, but they played with joy. He could see her spirit in them, the same honesty, the same light. Years went by, and he became known not just as a great musician, but as a kind teacher who taught people how to listen to their hearts. Every stage he performed on, he played her melody at least once, calling it the Song of the Heart. Audiences loved it, but very few knew the real story behind it, and that was how he wanted it. It wasn't about fame or credit. It was about keeping her gift alive. One night after a concert, he sat alone at the piano in the empty hall. The lights were dim and the air was still. He played her melody one more time, softly, slowly. As he reached the last note, he looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you." In that quiet moment, he felt a presence, a warmth, like the touch of sunlight on his face. He smiled. He knew she was there, listening, proud of the student who had finally learned the real meaning of music. He closed the piano lid gently, stood up, and walked toward the door. Outside, the night was peaceful. The stars shone brightly above like tiny notes scattered across the sky. He looked up and whispered, "You were right. Music never dies, it just changes the player." And with that, he walked away into the cool night, his heart light, his soul calm, carrying with him the melody of a simple woman who had changed his life forever, just by touching the keys.